Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm rejoined with Sid Karger to talk about The Bump. Sid is an award-winning writer and director on networks like Comedy Central, MTV, Sundance, BET, AMC, and two of the three major networks. Obviously, ABC needs to step up to the plate. Welcome, Sid.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I am so excited to chat about The Bump. But before we get to that, I know that you did a short film with HBO called Daddy. Can you tell the audience what that's about? It sounds so cute.
Yeah, so that was a short film, as you said, it was for HBO. It was sort of part of their LGBTQ short film festival. And it was really like a 6-minute short about a guy he's sort of has a one-night stand with a daddy, and then he sort of fantastically gives birth and becomes a daddy himself. So it's really like his journey of like, you see him, he's dating, and then all of a sudden it's a man who's pregnant, and it's kind of a fantasy, funny, ridiculous story that I made.
I love that. I love that. So he got his own bump.
He had a bump, and the whole thing happens, since he's a man, I kind of made up they're all sort of a unique set of rules for him. So like he becomes pregnant, unbelievably so. He talks to his best friend, and like almost right away his water breaks, however that happens. And he's, within like days, he's going to the hospital and having a baby. And then he runs in, I'll give it away because you can watch it and it's 5 minutes, but he runs into the one night stand, holding the baby at a cafe, and the guy's like, "Who's the baby?" So
I love that. That sounds so adorable. So now let's talk about the other adorable, and that's The Bump, which is what you're really here for. So
yeah.
Give the audience a setup of what The Bump is about, and then we'll get into the meat of it.
Yeah, so The Bump is a romantic comedy about a gay couple who are about to have their first baby via surrogacy, as you do, and they decide that they're going to kind of go on this epic road trip a few weeks before the baby's due. So they live in Brooklyn, New York, and the baby's going to be born in California, which is often the case with surrogacy. You never know where the surrogate's going to live and have the baby. So they decide to go, and they make this complete sort of planned itinerary of stops along the way. They're going to all their sort of favorite resort towns. And of course, like any kind of good road trip story, it doesn't go as planned. And there are all these detours along the way, and they, secrets kind of spill out, some grudges are overcome, and they kind of are also mending some sort of minor relationship issues that they have, because having a baby is this huge thing. And so there's some tension, and they have to work through some issues. And it's fun. It's hopefully funny and has some drama and some romance. And ultimately, it's sort of kind of about family. So they kind of reconnect with their families, and that idea that, as you grow older, you kind of see your parents and your family in a different light. They're just humans. And they're learning this as they're becoming parents and creating their own family.
So you have such an ability to give us characters on the page that are so relatable, that are so real and so fully formed. One of the things that I heard years and years ago was that, like it or not, we children are a slight extension of our parents. I heard a guru once say that, the reason children are born is to finish the business their parents didn't get a chance to finish, which I think is really simplistic in that kind of theory, because I don't always subscribe to it. But I do realize that I see things about my parents in my day-to-day life. Some I like and some I don't like. So I found that was something that you did so lyrically in The Bump, is that you gave us two guys who are in love but are having some issues. And then they have all kinds of other issues that they can't predict. And
Right.
Then how we get through those issues. What a great job you did.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I mean, I tried to make them to have that contrast between, two guys as a couple, I wanted to make sure that there's some polar opposite things happening. The one of them is a little more, let's say, organized, and the other one's a little more loosey goosey, love spontaneity. Their jobs are, I'll just say like Wyatt is a TV commercial director, so he's very organized. He could storyboard his life if he wanted to. And Biz is the other guy, and he was a child actor. He was on a sitcom in his teens, a Disney show, and he kind of moved to New York and went, a little bit sideways and couldn't get acting jobs and became a magazine writer. So, and now he's kind of longing to get back into acting. And then like their kind of polar opposite qualities, their families are different too. So Wyatt comes from a single mom. He didn't really know his dad. He had, one brother, where Biz comes from a super connected parents who have been together forever, love each other, 5 older sisters, so in every aspect they couldn't be different, and they have to learn how to like deal with their parents and their non-parents and their families and kind of push through all the problems that they're having as adults.
And I thought it was so lovingly done in the fact that it's we see all of the people and we see all of their needs and wants and desires and shortcomings as well. And that, so you, as I said, once again, you gave us real people, that these are real situations that I think everyone who reads this will say, I know someone like this one, or I know someone like that one. So are you like Wyatt? Are you a list maker, or are you more like Biz in the fact that you sort of fly by night or spontaneous? Maybe I don't want to, those characteristics in people are both beautiful. One is not better than the other in my estimation. But so which one are you?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I tried to make them both likable. Wyatt is organized, but in a good way, and Biz is spontaneous in a good way. And so for me, I relate to like kind of almost any character I write, whether it's the main character or minor character, someone making a quick 1-page appearance. I kind of find I'll sort of write it, and then I'm like, oh, I kind of am like that little part that I created. So I find myself in both Wyatt and Biz. I don't sort of subscribe. I try to like zig where you think I'm going to zag. And
I like that, and I'm very much a Wyatt, but with Biz in mind. So
yeah.
I make lists of the spontaneous things I'm going to do. It sounds crazy, but when I travel, I have a whole list of things that I might do, and when I get to traveling, it is that spontaneous thing that I always have the most fun, because I like to be surprised. I like to see things I've not seen before.
When you put it like that, I guess I'm more of a Biz with a Wyatt in mind.
All right, fair enough.
So I love to, like, because Biz is sort of fun, so I like to kind of have that fun quality. But then, right before something happens, I'm like, oh, I have to plan for this.
Totally understand. Totally understand. So you hit up some fun, what I would say, gay destinations. You hit up both P-Town and with a destination of Palm Springs in mind. Do you prefer one of the other? I mean, they're both very different, but I think they're very similar. Do you have a preference?
Yeah, and the characters plan a couple more along the way, and I don't want to spoil it, but they may or may not get to them. And so I've only been to Palm Springs a couple times, and I've been to P-Town a lot more, Provincetown in Massachusetts, Cape Cod, and I love them both. Like, I'm from the Midwest, so I kind of, either coast I can find happiness in. P-Town has a special place in my heart just because I discovered it, in my 20s, and I've been going there a lot, and I have a lot of friends who go there, and it's just like, it's the most beautiful place on earth, and there's a lot of history with artists and writers, and just this really rich creative community there. And then on top of that, it's sort of a slice of Americana with like fudge shops and taffy, shops. And the beach is this crazy thing that's so unique, that's like anything else. But Palm Springs, I spent a lot of time in LA, and when I go there, I'm always longing to get to Palm Springs. And so that drive from LA to Palm Springs, where you kind of like enter another dimension and the heat hits you and you see the windmills, and I love that. It's like, to me, that's like outer space.
I agree with you. And the things about places like Provincetown and Palm Springs are their destinations. So most people don't drive through them. I mean, you don't drive through Provincetown ever, because once you get there, you're at the end of the Cape. But
Literally.
Palm Springs is sort of the same way. Unless you're going from LA to, say, Phoenix, you don't really go through Palm Springs. So I find that places like P-Town and Palm Springs are imbued with happiness because people are actively seeking to get there.
Yes.
So I think that that's why so many people, when they travel to those two destinations, say, oh, I felt so at home there. And that's because people don't go there hating. They go there for the love of going there. And I think it makes a big difference in this world.
Oh, for sure. They're not transient towns. It's a destination. And a lot of people, consider both their happy place. So
That's right. That's right. So I think, speaking of happy place, I think that that is one of the things that I saw throughout this book. Wyatt and Biz really do love each other. They're having some bumps in the road, but they really do love each other. And that's something that comes through so clearly in the fact that they have worries about the future and about bringing a child into this world and having a child. Because I think that, so Wyatt had an absent father. So I think he worries about not being the kind of parent he could be. And Biz had a very active and very present father who he feels like did a great job. And he's afraid he may be short in living up to his dad. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
that's exactly right. They're both coming at it from opposite ends of the spectrum with different fears based on the dads that they grew up with. And they kind of, I don't want to give it away again, but like they kind of learn to sort of meet in the middle and overlap. And in the end, they realize, maybe the fear wasn't as justified. And sort of like any kind of giant milestone in your life, if you're, buying a house or moving or starting a new job, it's like you have all this sort of tensions and stress that come with that sort of build up. And then all the things that, especially if you have a partner, come into focus. They're polar opposites to begin with, and that's what attracted to them each other. So when this is happening, those polar opposite qualities are coming to the surface, and they're like, oh, you can't do it that way, you have to do it this way. And but they kind of learn over the course of this story how to kind of come together. But yeah, it's all sort of based, I really wanted to get sort of deep into their families and their family histories and kind of figure out why they're acting the way they do and what their motivation is based on where they came from.
So I will say, now that you brought that up, so I did not know you knew my mother, because my mother was sort of like Beverly.
Oh, really?
Within reason. Probably a little harder than Beverly. So tell us about Wyatt's mother, because I love what you've done with Beverly.
So Wyatt's mother is sort of Wyatt times a million. She's sort of always perfectly dressed in high heels and makeup and nails and hair and the whole thing. And, like she would show up to PTA conferences, like clicking down the hallway in her high heels, because she, was divorced, and she had she was a single mom with 2 kids early on. So she kind of had to make something of herself. So she started this real estate company with her 5 best friends, who all have their first names start with B. And they're kind of like the killer bees, realtors. And so she's, a professional working woman, single mom. So she runs a tight ship, but we love her. And, she, when Wyatt interacts with her, she wants to be with him all the time and hang out, and they're buddies. So it's fun.
And it is nice because we do get to see, that's one lovely thing about a rom-com, and especially in The Bump, we really do get to see how close the family units are in total. It's nice to have a book to read that you don't feel like the characters are shunned or put aside or looked down upon. And you've done a great job in giving us family units that may be dysfunctional, but yet at the same time, they function well together because of their love of each other. There were some moments between Beverly and Wyatt that just, I mean, I just cried because they're just so beautiful.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah. So it works. So did you have a particular character that was your favorite to write? Good, bad, or indifferent?
Well, it's interesting because I started writing it. It's a dual POV, so we get each chapter alternates between Wyatt and Biz, and I started writing it sort of with a third person narrator.
Okay.
And I kind of I got through a draft and then I sort of stumbled my way through like, oh, I'm not sure if we're getting, really behind their thoughts. And like, I didn't feel, just working with my editor too, it's sort of like, we didn't feel like we were super connected with the third person narrator. In my first book, Best Man was also first person. So I'm like, let me try this and I'm going to do it with the two. And then that's when it sort of like clicked. I'm like, oh, this is fun because one, I have all the goalposts of their development and same with the other. And so I kind of it was fun to sort of explore their voices. So it was sort of like when I wrote one chapter on Wyatt and sort of where he was coming from, it was a relief to go back to Biz and sort of like figure out where he was coming from. So they were both really fun. They're both my children.
Well, and I think sometimes when I ask authors that, I really do realize the fact that you put your heart and soul into creating characters, and it is like children or animals. You don't want to pick a favorite one because you know it's going to influence the other one. But then I do sometimes, so I have interviewed some authors, especially if it's in the mystery genre or a thriller, where perhaps the serial killer was their most favorite because they could say or do most anything with a serial killer. So I'm like, okay, I can totally understand that.
Yeah, I think the villains are probably really fun to write.
Well, I think so. And I think, I think that's one of the reasons why I like Beverly. I don't find Beverly's a villain at all. But what I find is she's a very clear, sure character. She knows exactly who she is. She knows exactly everything she's worn in the last 30 days. She could tell you exactly. And that's somebody I recognize that because I have a little OCD or ADHD or crazy, whatever. I don't know. But there are things that I associate one with the other that I'm exactly sure of what happened when. So those are fun for me.
Oh, yeah. She doesn't have the same pair of eyeglasses. You'll never see her in the same outfit. That was really fun. And since it's a road trip, they're kind of going from city to city. So they're meeting and interacting with certain quirky people depending on the location. So those characters were fun to write. Everything I couldn't put into Biz and Wyatt, it's sort of like, oh, I'm going to dump this onto this character because it's weird and that's believable that you run into this weird character, but then hopefully make them a little, three-dimensional where they're not just this weird stranger they encounter. There's something a little more to it, and it sort of relates back to Wyatt and Biz's story.
It does. And, so I don't remember their names. I did not write their names down, but there's the couple that are silent towards the end of the book. That was just so much fun because, it sort of mirrored where Wyatt and Biz were at that moment in their life. They were having hard time saying what they really needed to say. So I was like, oh, look at that. Look at Sid being clever.
Thank you for getting that. I appreciate that.
Yes. So now I have to ask you I have a couple of weird questions to ask you, or maybe unique. So have you zip lined before?
Oh, I did once in Costa Rica. I was there for a wedding. And I guess I'm very much like Biz where I don't enjoy heights or I'm not actively like a thrill seeker like that, and there's part of him that is like that, and so I did it reluctantly and it was a thrill. It was great.
I did it in Puerto Rico, and I can tell you it's one of the strangest things I've ever done because I don't mind heights, but I'm not so much in the not being sure what's under my feet type of person. But it was one of the highlights of my trip to Puerto Rico. It was so gorgeous. And doing the Superman, which is sort of what Biz does, where lay flat. That was the most magical experience I think in my life, just because I felt free. I felt like a bird, and I always wanted to be a bird. So
yeah, I remember it's a very memorable experience. In the first few moments of it, I was freaking out,
terrified.
But then you kind of go with it, and it's a good kind of character development for a character in a story who can do that and overcome it, and then sort of apply that to his fear for having a baby.
Yes, and I think that's exactly the things that go through your mind. So that brings up my next little quirky question. Is this book pre-autobiographical? Are you having a child?
It's a little bit of wish fulfillment. I think before the pandemic, my partner and I were doing research on all the different ways to have a kid as gay guys do. And so it's interesting because in my 20, people I grew up with, my older siblings, they all had kids very early in their 20s, early 30s. And just like as gay guys, it's sort of like we're not living the super traditional kind of similar lives, and we're still trying to figure out our bearings as we get older. And then for me, I was reaching a certain point where I was like, oh, there's a bit of I'm feeling this ticking clock of like wanting to nurture someone other than our dog. So there was there's a lot of research that we did, and it was before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit. But so during that time, a lot of our friends gay guys were having kids of their own. So I was hearing these stories, and way before Zoom, there was a friend of ours who were having their first baby via surrogacy, and they because Zoom has made it easier, they were going from state to state, and they were driving from state to state to meet the surrogates. And for whatever reason, one after another would fall out, or it didn't work, they couldn't match with one. And I was empathizing as I'm hearing this, but at the same time, I filed it in the back of my head. And I was like, this is a great story for something. I don't know what shape it's going to take. And when I came to writing this book, I was like, oh, maybe I can apply that, but sort of raise the stakes. And instead of meeting the surrogates, they're actually about to have a baby. And, who are those characters and what do they look like? So that's kind of where the germ of the idea came from. And then it was a bit of pre-wish fulfillment on my part.
Well, you got to have the baby without the stretch marks, so it works out well, I guess. So
yes,
I know that you're going to be at the Ripped Bodice here in LA with Christopher Rice on the 29th. I'm excited to see you again. So anybody in the LA area, come on out to the Ripped Bodice in Culver City, and you can meet Sid in person and get an autographed book. Yes. Or buy an autographed book. I guess I might ought to make a little bit of a headway there. So, Sid, do you have a social media or a website you'd like to share?
I do, yeah. And in addition to that, I'm going to be at the Strand on May 21st in conversation with Anderson Cooper in New York. So that'll be
fun. Lovely.
Yeah. And my website is just sidkarger.com. And then I'm on Instagram at sidkny. And Twitter at Sid Karger.
Perfect. So again, the book is called The Bump. Thank you so much for joining me, Sid. I'm looking forward to great success with this.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Super fun.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at Go Out with Dan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.